Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission here is always to take the chaos of information, filter it ruthlessly, and give you the distilled insight. Today, we are stepping away from the boardrooms and into a singular cold case, one that really exemplifies the collision between old-school detective work and the relentless, compassionate power of the internet.
That's right. We are diving deep into the case of the young man known for 2 decades only as Grateful Doe. And this mystery, it's rooted in tragedy, specifically a fatal car crash on June 26, 1995, in the deep south of rural Virginia.
And it's a case that law enforcement struggled with for 20 years. I mean, just a handful of frustratingly minimal clues. You have to picture it.
Yeah.
A gruesome accident in Emporia, Virginia, off U.S. Route 58 West. They find a completely wrecked Vanagon just smashed against a pair of trees. 2 young men were dead.
The driver, he was identified pretty quickly. Michael Hager, a 21-year-old college student on his way home to South Carolina. But the passenger, he was partially ejected from the wreck. And he carried nothing. A tie-dyed Grateful Dead t-shirt, some ticket stubs, and a total absence of identification. That lack of a name right there, it instantly turned a tragic traffic accident into a baffling cold case.
And the initial police assessment back in '95 was that the case was basically impossible to solve. So our mission today is to trace those few desperate clues left behind, to analyze why the official system failed to identify him, and then to break down the sophisticated crowdsourced methods used by digital communities that ultimately solved the mystery 20 years later.
We're going to show how a simple, heartfelt plea posted on Imgur, of all places, managed to succeed where, the Secret Service and local police departments just couldn't. This isn't just a true crime story. It's a really detailed look at the tectonic shift in investigative power and the legacy it has left for missing persons cases nationwide.
Okay, let's begin at the beginning then. Phase 1. The scene, the clues, and the initial fumbles in 1995. We have to go back to that scene, to the work of State Trooper Ted Jones. What was the physical evidence telling him about the crash itself?
Well, the physical scene was clear enough to establish a cause pretty quickly. Trooper Jones, he analyzed the long tire tracks that were veering off the highway, and his conclusion was that Michael Hager, the driver, had likely fallen asleep at the wheel.
And that was immediately backed up by forensics, right?
Immediately. The autopsy showed that both men had, and this is critical, no drugs or alcohol in their systems.
That detail is actually so significant, given the whole context of the Grateful Dead.
It's huge, absolutely. The automatic assumption, especially in the mid-90s, associated with that subculture was, immediate drug use. For the investigation to definitively refute that right out of the gate, it meant they had to look past the stereotype and focus purely on the evidence. This was an exhaustion-related accident, not an impairment-related one. It focused their initial search on identity, not on, criminality.
Okay, so let's turn to the Grateful Doe himself. The meager list of items found on his person is, it's legendary in cold case circles. What exactly did they inventory?
The inventory was desperately thin. I mean, really thin. He had 4 quarters, a yellow Bic lighter, and 2 specific Grateful Dead ticket stubs.
That was it.
That was the entirety of his possessions carried on his body. No wallet, no driver's license, no keys. And critically, no backpack or luggage was found near the wreckage either, which suggests those items were either lost or maybe stolen before the crash even happened.
Let's dig into the ticket analysis, because this was the first huge geographic clue. The tickets were for 2 shows, June 24th and 25th, 1995.
And those dates were just crucial. They placed him exactly 48 hours before the crash. The concerts themselves were held at RFK Stadium in Washington, D.C., which is about 180 miles north of the crash site in Emporia. So we know he was part of that Deadhead subculture, and we know he had just started traveling south from the D.C. area.
And there's a cultural context here that's fascinating, too.
Oh, absolutely. This was the final Grateful Dead tour, just 2 months before Jerry Garcia died. It was literally the end of an era, so anyone on that tour was deeply immersed in that specific subculture at its final crescendo.
So they had the tickets, a great lead. But trying to trace them back, where did that lead?
To an immediate dead end. A perfect example of the limits of a 1995 investigation. They did manage to trace the tickets through their source back to a man from Pennsylvania who was, thankfully, alive and well. But he wasn't a fan. He was a ticket scalper. He'd bought 20 tickets and resold them all.
So he had no idea who he sold them to?
None at all. When Trooper Jones interviewed him, the scalper just couldn't recall. In 1995, there's no digital record, no way to trace a cash transaction like that. The trail went ice cold right there.
So without the tickets, They were forced back to what is probably the most tantalizing and frustrating clue of all,
Uh-huh.
the handwritten note, the Jason note. What did the investigation make of this?
The note, which they found either in his pocket or right next to the body, read, "Jason, sorry we had to go see you around, call me." It was signed by Carolyn T. and Carolyn O. And it included this little doodle that everyone believed was a drawing of Jerry Garcia, which just reaffirms that deadhead connection.
The name Jason must have seemed like a gift from heaven, but the phone number attached to it was useless, wasn't it?
Exactly. It was a local number, but it critically lacked an area code. And in 1995, a state trooper doesn't have a centralized national database or a reverse lookup that can cycle through every area code in the country, or even just the ones along the tour route. They tried local Virginia area codes, of course. It led nowhere. It's a perfect example of a clue that would probably be solved in 5 minutes today, but it completely paralyzed the investigation back then.
So they had to rely entirely on the physical details. Let's inventory the physical description and clothing the police recorded, because these details are what the internet would later obsess over for years.
They documented him as being young, for sure, estimated between 15 and 21 years old. He had brown eyes, and his long, curly brown or dark blonde hair was dyed a really noticeable reddish hue. His teeth were also well cared for. He had his wisdom teeth, but no extensive prior dental work, which suggests he likely came from a family who had access to at least basic dentistry.
And his clothing, that immediately defined his identity for them.
Oh yeah, the clothing was the brand. The signature tie-dyed Grateful Dead t-shirt, multiple beaded and macrame necklaces, light blue Levi's jeans, and these distinct black Fila running shoes size 11 and a half. But the most specific identifiers were the tattoos. He had a faded tattoo on his right arm, a scar on his back, and a very specific, almost certainly homemade star tattoo on his upper left arm. Plus, his left ear was pierced, but there was no earring. These two tattoos, particularly that star, they would later serve as a crucial point of verification.
Okay, so this moves us into the complexity of Phase 2, the early investigation's dead ends and contradictions. To understand who the doe was, investigators first needed to know when and where the driver, Michael Hager, picked him up. What do we know about Michael Hager's timeline?
Michael's timeline is tight, and it's highly documented. He left his fiancée in Fairfax County, Virginia at 7:45 a.m. on the morning of the crash. He then drove south, stopping at his father's house in Williamsburg, Virginia, around noon. His father wasn't home, but Michael left a message saying he was definitely heading to his mother's home in Inman, South Carolina. The fatal crash happened only 90 minutes later at 1:30 p.m.
So he was moving quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But the key investigative problem here is the contradiction about where he picked up the passenger.
Exactly. There was a report, it was published in a 1996 freelance article, and it quoted Michael's father's neighbor, and that neighbor claimed to have seen a young man matching the Grateful Dead's description with Michael at the Williamsburg house at noon.
If that's true, it changes everything. It means he was picked up much closer to the concert site.
Right, closer to Fairfax. It suggests they might have known each other, or at least met shortly after the concerts. But Trooper Jones actively contradicted this report. He publicly stated that the neighbor's report was incorrect.
So what was his theory?
Jones believed the doe was a hitchhiker and that he was picked up much further south, somewhere between Gloucester and the crash site in Emporia. This contradiction just created massive confusion. Were they travel buddies who met in D.C.? Or was he a random hitchhiker Michael picked up just before the crash? The ambiguity over that one detail wasted precious early investigative time and made it so much harder to zero in on a point of origin. But the one constant was the direction of travel, south, towards South Carolina.
So early on, we have a number of pretty significant official investigative failures and barriers that are just compounding the initial lack of evidence. What were the limits of 1995 police work here?
Well, it's important to note, Trooper Jones did put in a lot of effort. He distributed the physical description and the fingerprints really widely to local police agencies, which generated about 15 missing persons matches that all failed the fingerprint test. And crucially, he sent them to the Secret Service.
Why the Secret Service specifically? That seems a little unusual.
It does, but in 1995, the FBI's big fingerprint database, IAFIS, was still kind of decentralized and evolving. For certain types of prints, especially for transient individuals who might have had some run-ins with authorities but weren't, hardened criminals, the Secret Service sometimes had a larger or more accessible database than the FBI's civilian records. So Jones was just trying to cast the largest possible net, even if it was unconventional.
But despite that effort, the critical shortcomings just stalled the case indefinitely. You mentioned 3 major points of failure. Let's Start with the first one. The identity conflict.
This was a physical barrier that the police just couldn't immediately overcome. The doe suffered severe facial lacerations in the crash. That prevented the immediate release of a photo, which is, the #1 tool you have. So they had to rely solely on description.
And even that was flawed.
Very flawed. Some of the early news organizations, they misreported a key detail. They called him a redhead instead of dark blonde-brown hair dyed reddish. That small inaccuracy, it eliminates potential matches whose parents knew their son had dark hair, not naturally red hair. It's a tiny detail with huge consequences.
And the second failure, the lack of coverage. The ticket stubs screamed out-of-state traveler, but the news coverage was siloed.
It was a failure of jurisdictional reach. Totally understandable in a pre-internet age, but still a failure. The investigation was locally driven, which meant the news coverage was strictly limited to the Virginia area. They were only reaching people who lived near the crash site. But the tickets proved he was an out-of-state deadhead traveler. They needed national-specific community coverage, but the only tool they had was literally mailing descriptions to different news desks.
Which brings us to the third, and maybe the most critical failure, the sketch delay. A picture of the victim is the most important tool in any identification case.
And that tool just arrived far too late. The forensic sketch, a really crucial piece of evidence that could have been instantly recognizable to his family or friends, was only released 7 months after the crash.
7 months.
By January 1996, the initial news cycle about the accident had long passed. The urgency was gone. The sketch got minimal attention. If that sketch had been distributed in July of 1995, while the Grateful Dead tour was still active and families were wondering where their kids were, this case likely would have been solved instantly.
7 months is the difference between an urgent appeal and a dusty cold case file. It paints a clear picture of the constraints Trooper Jones was operating under.
It really does. His final perspective, he summed it up later saying, "I investigated everything from every angle and nothing ever panned out." It just reflects that deep frustration of working within those analog constraints. The case officially went cold. It was transferred to the state medical examiner's office in Richmond, Virginia, where it just waited for an external match to come in, and that match was never going to arrive through their existing system.
And that's our transition point, isn't it? The case goes into a filing cabinet, but the world around it changes fundamentally. We move into phase 3, the long cold sleep and the rise of web sleuths. The late 1990s and early 2000s saw the birth of these digital true crime communities.
This is the era of digital archaeology. The launch of web sleuths in 1999 and the Doe Network in 2004, they fundamentally democratized cold case investigation.
Yeah.
Suddenly you had these massive, centralized, searchable databases and forums where thousands of dedicated amateurs could cross-reference data.
And the Grateful Doe was finally pulled out of that filing cabinet and given a digital home.
He was. In 2004, a profile page was created on the Doe Network. But the true investigation, the real work, began in 2005. That's when the case was posted on Web Sleuths by a user named Trying to ID. And this user, they became the primary advocate, translating that sparse police report into actionable digital clues.
So what were these early digital detectives focusing on? What were the early online theories and the frustration that came with them?
The initial speculation, it centered on the scant evidence they had. Did the Jason note really apply to him, or was it just incidental trash found near the wreck? Was he a runaway? Did he shed his ID on purpose? The theories reflected the lack of hard facts, but the emotional component was really high. These amateurs were so moved by the story of this nameless young man, and they were deeply frustrated by law enforcement's perceived inaction, or, more accurately, the institutional inability to share information.
And that tension between the amateur effort and the official opacity became a recurring theme, right? That user trying to ID really put that frustration into words.
They did. They questioned that barrier to entry explicitly, saying, "The police do not have time to help this young man, so why not release information to me, someone that is willing to give any extra time I have to this young man?" And this just highlights the clash. Professionals citing protocol and privacy, citizens demanding transparency and offering free, dedicated labor.
But the web sleuths weren't waiting for permission. They took it upon themselves to conduct continuous amateur efforts. How do they operate in this early phase?
Their efforts were rigorous, but so frustrating. They constantly compared that poor quality 7-month-old forensic sketch and the physical description against online databases of missing persons. And whenever a promising similarity was found, a young man with reddish-brown hair and a scar, the lead would be brought to the forum, and trying to ID would then personally contact the Virginia medical examiner to request a fingerprint comparison.
And every single time, the lead failed the test.
Every single time. It was a decade of continuous effort that always hit a wall. It proved that dedication alone wasn't enough. They needed a wider net and really better visual evidence.
Now, let's talk about a promising lead that ended up being a crucial dead end, the wharf rats theory.
Mm.
How did this culture-specific detail even emerge, and why was it so important?
This is a perfect example of how niche knowledge, the kind of knowledge that only an experienced deadhead would possess, can unlock a cold case lead. The Wharf Rats are a support group. They're similar to Narcotics Anonymous or Alcoholics Anonymous, and they hold sessions at Grateful Dead and other jam band concerts. Their whole purpose is to help members maintain sobriety while they're on tour.
And the connection to the note was immediate.
It was. The most prominent founder of the Wharf Rats, who is often referred to as Mom within that community, was named Carolyn Thomas. That name was an almost perfect match for the Carolyn T signature on that cryptic note. This was seen as a massive breakthrough because it tied the dough directly to a specific, organized group within the deadhead subculture.
So, a user trying to ID follows this lead, actually reaches out to Carolyn Thomas. What was her response, and why did this dead end still prove valuable?
She confirmed she was not the Carolyn T who wrote the note, so, a disappointment. It confirmed the note writers were likely just two other women who shared those common names. But here's the crucial pivot. Carolyn Thomas agreed to take the Grateful Doe case information, the sketch, the description, the crash facts, and distribute it to the extensive network of deadheads she knew globally. This was the first time the case information had been efficiently disseminated to the exact community most likely to recognize him, something the original 1995 investigation completely failed to do. The internet community had successfully expanded the search, even through a failed lead.
A decade of relentless, frustrating work passes. Then we hit phase 4, the viral explosion, 2012-2015. The case needed a catalyst, and that came in 2012. What was the renewed digital effort then?
The game changer was the involvement of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC. They used modern forensic technology to create a brand new, much clearer, computer-generated facial reconstruction of the Grateful Doe. They referenced the original autopsy photos and measurements. This was a massive improvement over that grainy, 7-month delayed 1996 police sketch.
How did the online community react to this new, updated image?
With both hope and some critical scrutiny, users immediately noticed discrepancies between the NCMEC image and the old police sketch. Analysts in the forums correctly pointed out that this difference was likely due to the severe facial trauma the Doe sustained in the crash, which would make an accurate reconstruction difficult regardless of the tech. But the image was undeniably clearer and more compelling, and it was immediately circulated across these fledgling social media platforms.
And that's when the community started to consolidate its efforts beyond just web sleuths.
Yes. That same year, two dedicated users, Alyssa and Leah, started a specific Facebook page just for the Grateful Doe. Facebook allowed for photo sharing and tagging on a scale that Web Sleuths, which is a forum, just couldn't match. Theories continued to evolve. The focus shifted from, was he a runaway, to, was he an abducted child, or maybe a foster kid whose records were lost. The persistent emotional investment of these group moderators became the core driving force.
So the case was gaining this slow momentum, but it needed something to truly break through the noise of the internet. That moment arrived on New Year's Eve 2014. This is the climax of the digital investigation.
This is the moment where, digital marketing strategy meets true crime advocacy. A user known as Gray Metal created a really professional-looking collage. It combined the new NCMEC images and all the key textual evidence. And she chose to post it not on a dedicated true crime forum, but on Imgur, a major image-sharing platform. But the crucial decision was the tone.
Instead of just a police bulletin, she wrote a first-person appeal.
Exactly. The post was written from the perspective of the Doe himself. Do you recognize me? I have been without my name for nearly 20 years. His family do not know who I am. For 20 years, no one has come forward to identify me. I have adopted the identity of the Grateful Doe. This personification, the humanizing of a cold case file, was revolutionary. It bypassed the typical true crime niche and just pulled at the heartstrings of a vast general audience.
And the impact was instant and just exponential.
The post exploded. It immediately hit the first page of Imgur. It garnered millions of views in days. The virality spilled over, leading to the creation of a dedicated Reddit subreddit, a platform known for its deep dive collaborative research. The original Facebook group tripled its membership overnight. They added 2,000 highly engaged members in just a few days.
So for the first time, you have 4 major distinct online communities: Imgur, Reddit, Facebook, and Web Sleuths, all coordinated and focused on this one individual. How did the sheer volume of tips from this virality not just cripple the investigation?
That's a critical question, and it really speaks to the efficiency of the crowd when it's organized. The groups quickly established a kind of verification hierarchy. Web Sleuths, with its history and established protocols, became the vetting mechanism for old leads. Reddit specialized in niche searches, and local knowledge users in Myrtle Beach were checking yearbooks and contacting old businesses. And Facebook focused on broad public awareness and reaching family members. So instead of being crippling, the volume of tips, when handled by a distributed, coordinated network, became the fuel for the final identification.
This momentum led directly into Phase V, the final leads and identification. The Imgur blast opened the floodgates, and 3 crucial leads confirming the name Jason emerged rapidly.
These 3 leads just converged perfectly. It created a highly consistent profile. The first was a Facebook lead. Someone pointed to a Jason who worked at a Grateful Dead merchandise shop in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, a year or 2 before the crash. This established a strong geographic link to the South. The second, from a new user on Web Sleuths, knew a friendly, talkative young man named Jay, who was definitely on the 1995 tour. They mentioned he was known for being itinerant, often getting rides and staying at people's homes. And crucially, they noted he always carried a wallet and a backpack items that were missing from the crash scene, which strongly supports the theory that those items were lost or stolen before he met Michael Hager.
And then the Reddit lead really solidified the narrative, providing the final piece of that non-forensic puzzle.
Right. The third lead from Reddit came from a man who had actually been roommates with a Jason in 1994 and early 1995. And this description was incredibly rich. Jason was a laid-back surfer dude, a massive deadhead, 17 or 18 years old, and originally from Myrtle Beach. He had worked at a McDonald's there before leaving in early 1995 to follow the band. The consistency of the first name Jason and the home base Myrtle Beach was just overwhelming at this point.
The pieces now fit together perfectly, allowing the Web Sleuths to construct the connecting theory of his final journey.
The emerging narrative became the operating hypothesis. Jason Callahan, assuming the name was correct, lost or had his wallet and backpack stolen while traveling on the tour. Out of money and ID, he was hitchhiking home to his base in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Michael Hager, the driver, was heading to Inman, South Carolina. Since Inman is geographically close to Myrtle Beach, Michael was the perfect ride to take Jason a significant portion of the way home. It explained the lack of ID, the direction of travel, everything.
The moment of identification really came with the submission of photographs from that former roommate.
The photos showed a young man with quiet eyes, half shut most of the time, with a bright smile. The online communities were just stunned by the resemblance. They noted that the photos strongly matched the original, though poor, 1996 police sketches. This was the transition from a theoretical match to a strong personal identification.
And that visual evidence finally made it to the one person who mattered most, his mother, Margaretta Evans.
Days after the roommate photos went viral on Facebook, a man saw them and recognized the young face. He called his mother Margaretta Evans. She then posted directly into the Facebook group, confirming the truth they had all been hunting for. "Oh my God, this is my son, Jason Callahan from Myrtle Beach. I've been looking for him all this time with no luck."
That moment, after 20 years of silence, must have been overwhelming.
Okay.
But even after Margaretta posted, the digital moderators handled the situation with remarkable caution.
They had to. The moderators, Leah and Alyssa, they knew they couldn't risk giving false hope or exposing the family to scammers. They actually retained a lawyer to confirm Margaretta's identity and verify she was indeed the mother of a missing Jason Callahan before they proceeded with the official forensic process. It speaks volumes about the maturity and, the ethical approach the amateur community took.
Then came the final hurdle, the DNA gauntlet. Margaretta officially filed a missing person report 20 years late and provided her DNA sample. What was her description of Jason at that time?
Margaretta's information was crucial, but it also contained a potential discrepancy. She described Jason as about 5 foot 10 to 6 foot, 160 pounds, with wavy blonde hair and brown eyes. But she also stated he had no known tattoos. Given the Grateful Doe had two notable tattoos, that faded one and the homemade star, this was a slight worry. It's easily explained by the fact that he might have gotten them after leaving home, but it added a layer of investigative caution.
And the initial DNA test provided a just devastating setback.
It was inconclusive. And this is where the technical complexity of forensic DNA matching really comes into play. DNA samples for unidentified bodies often require comparison samples from both maternal and paternal lines for a definitive, high-confidence match. Jason's father had passed away in 2009, which removed that critical paternal lineage marker, so the mother sample alone wasn't sufficient for the Virginia medical examiner to make an official identification.
So they had to rebuild the family tree and find other paternal relatives.
Exactly. They had to cast a wider net into Jason's paternal side to provide the necessary genetic data. Samples were collected from two half-sisters, a half-brother, and a cousin. This painstaking, collaborative effort finally yielded results. On December 9, 2015, almost a year to the day after the Imgur post ignited the viral search, the DNA results confirmed definitively that the Grateful Doe was Jason Callahan, missing since 1995.
It's a powerful moment of closure achieved solely through the persistence and coordinated effort of strangers online.
The Facebook group shared the news with immense relief. The news we have been waiting for? The DNA results are back that our Grateful Doe is, in fact, Jason Callahan, missing since 1995. Because of everyone here, this man will finally make his way home.
This brings us to Phase X, the lingering questions and the legacy of collaboration. The identification was a massive victory, but it immediately raised the central, painful question: why he wasn't reported missing. This led to significant online debate and, unfairly, some backlash against his mother.
This point requires empathy and context because it speaks to a systemic failure in how we handle missing young adults. Margaret Evans faced two major barriers. First, jurisdiction. She lived in Myrtle Beach, her son was following a national touring band, and the crash happened in rural Virginia. Where exactly was she supposed to file a report? She just didn't know.
And the second, more profound reason relates to the culture he was a part of.
His half-sister, Shannon Mickelson, provided this painful context. She stated that everyone assumed he wanted to be missing. Jason's mother hoped he was living his life married and happy. This wasn't negligence, it was a devastating assumption rooted in the reality of the deadhead lifestyle.
We need to spend a little more time on this wandering lifestyle context because it's the core societal takeaway of this case. How did cultural assumptions and police policy combine to prevent this report?
This is a massive issue the case brought to light. For many young adults who choose a transient, counterculture, or off-grid lifestyle, parents often lose contact and assume that this is a choice. They assume they are simply living off the grid, not dead or in danger. And when parents do contact the police about a young adult, the response is often dismissive.
Because they aren't considered high-risk runaways in the same way minors are.
Precisely. Police departments often have policies that make filing a missing person report for a young adult near the age of majority extremely difficult, sometimes requiring a 24-hour waiting period or citing that the individual is old enough to do as she pleased, as one web sleuth recalled being told about her own sister. This creates an enormous gap in the safety net. If Jason was presumed to have chosen his absence, no official search would ever begin unless a body was found and somehow matched back to a national database, a match that requires a missing person report in the first place.
It's a chilling feedback loop. The lack of a report means the body can't be identified, and the assumption he chose to wander means a report was never filed.
And that's exactly why the online community, with its high emotional investment and low barrier to entry, was so essential. They didn't assume Jason was wandering, they assumed he deserved a name.
Despite the controversy and the complexity, the family's overriding emotion was profound gratitude for the searchers.
Shannon Mickelson spoke so eloquently about the compassion shown by the online community, noting, "This is not how I expected to find my brother, yet knowing so many people cared gives me some sort of peace." The closure they received was delivered entirely by dedicated strangers using digital tools.
So let's look forward. What is the lasting impact on digital communities and law enforcement from the Grateful Doe case?
This case fundamentally proved the legitimacy and the sheer efficiency of crowdsourced investigation when it's managed correctly. It wasn't a lucky break. It was a deliberate, coordinated effort. Trisha Griffith, the owner of Web Sleuths, she voiced the hope that law enforcement would begin to view sites like hers as crucial, vetted resources rather than just sources of noise or unverified tips.
And the scale of the problem these communities are fighting is enormous.
It is. The Grateful Doe case stands as a powerful beacon of hope against staggering annual statistics. Roughly 600,000 people are reported missing in the U.S. every year, and about 4,400 unidentified bodies are recovered annually. And while many are eventually found or identified, thousands of cases still languish. The digital community proved that dedicated attention can resolve cases that the institutional system has failed to touch for decades.
And the legacy of Jason Callahan continues to pay dividends.
Absolutely. The dedicated Facebook group and the subreddit created to find Jason, having achieved their goal, have since dedicated themselves to finding other unidentified persons. They took the structure and the lessons learned from the Grateful Doe case and applied it immediately to others. They are now an established, knowledgeable, and highly effective resource. It proved that sometimes the most powerful investigative tool is persistent human empathy, just amplified by global connectivity.
Okay, let's recap this incredible, frustrating, and ultimately redemptive journey. It starts with a smoking wreck in rural Virginia, 2 victims, and 0 identification on the passenger. Law enforcement is stymied by an incomplete phone number, a delayed sketch, and a total lack of jurisdictional reach in the age of snail mail and local newspaper coverage.
The key failure points were really the assumptions made about the victim's lifestyle and the inability to get information out widely. It took 2 decades for the world to catch up to the case, driven by users on web sleuths, Facebook, and finally, that viral Imgur post that humanized him.
And the coordination between these platforms, vetting on web sleuths, outreach on Facebook, and that niche searching on Reddit, finally focused the lens on Myrtle Beach and the name Jason Callahan. The process was messy, relying on complex DNA testing, but the relentless collaboration ensured the closure that Jason's mother deserved.
It's an identification achieved not through traditional police work, but through dedicated crowdsourced investigation. It forces us to acknowledge that the landscape of forensic identity has changed forever.
So here's a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider, building directly on the complexities revealed in the Grateful Doe case. Given that this case was stalled because authorities assumed Jason chose to disappear and was not in danger, how can modern digital identity markers, things like old social media profiles, forgotten emails, or a specific digital footprint, be ethically and practically integrated into law enforcement databases? The challenge is twofold: creating a safety net that ensures that future young adults who vanish are recognized as missing persons and not simply people who chose to drop off the grid, while simultaneously respecting the crucial needs for personal privacy and data security. It's a collaboration that law enforcement and digital communities are still learning how to navigate in real time.